On the night of November 28, 2001, something dreadful happened in the peaceful town of Chester, South Carolina. The house where an older couple lived suddenly caught fire. By 2 a.m., firefighters were hard at work trying to put out the fire, believing the house was empty. But once the fire was out, they made a shocking discovery. The bodies of 66-year-old Joe Frank Pittman and his 62-year-old wife, Joy Pittman, were found inside. This wasn't just a house fire, it was a double murder. But the questions surrounding this tragic event were far from over. Where was 12-year-old Christopher Pittman, the couple's grandson who lived with them? To truly understand the situation around these murders, let's start from the beginning. Christopher Frank Pittman, born on April 9, 1989, lived in Oxford, Florida, with his father, Joe Pittman, and older sister, Danielle. His mother had left the family when he was just 2 years old. Despite the family's turmoil, Chris was known for his caring and gentle nature. However, as he grew up, his life took a turbulent turn. Chris moved to different homes throughout his childhood, including living with his maternal grandmother for a while and later with his father and stepmother after Joe's remarriage. The divorce of his father and stepmother led to another significant change. Chris moving in with his paternal grandparents, Joe Frank and Joy, in Chester, South Carolina. Chris was exceptionally close to them, considering them like his own parents. In 2001, when Chris was 12 years old, his mother unexpectedly returned, creating confusion and tension within the family. Chris, who had grown attached to his grandparents, was torn between the two worlds. He wanted to be back with his grandparents, as he found stability and safety with them. However, a series of tumultuous events began to take a toll on him. In Florida, Chris's life took a harsh turn. His father was going through his third divorce, creating a turbulent and stressful home environment. Family members and friends noticed changes in Chris. He started to show signs of anxiety, along with episodes of aggression and depression. During a particularly dark episode, he even threatened to harm himself, expressing his desire to be with his grandparents in Chester. Chris's desperation reached a breaking point, leading him to run away from home in an attempt to return to his grandparents. The police found him 15 miles away and brought him back to his father's home. However, Chris's behavior continued to worsen. He seemed caught between aggressive outbursts and episodes of depression. The mounting pressure eventually led to his return to Chester, where he longed for the comfort of his grandparents' home. In Chester, people noticed a change in Chris. He was no longer the cheerful and expressive child he once was. He had transformed into a teenager with a short temper and got into conflicts with various people, including classmates. Just one day before the tragic events, he choked a fellow student on the school bus, causing concern among school officials. Then came that fateful evening of November 28, 2001. After a severe scolding from his grandfather, Joe, Chris's emotional turmoil escalated. In the early morning hours, Chris shot his grandparents in their sleep, killing them in their own home. He then set the house on fire, crafting an intricate plan to cover his tracks. The fire department and authorities arrived to a chaotic scene. After extinguishing the fire, authorities discovered the lifeless bodies of Joe and Joy Pittman inside. This was a heart-wrenching discovery for the close-knit community. But one question remained. Where was Christopher, their grandson? A frantic search began, and Chris was eventually found a few miles from the burned house, in the woods, inside his grandparents' SUV. The shocking part? He was calm. Chris claimed he'd been kidnapped by a large, unidentified man who had killed his grandparents, set their house ablaze, and taken him away. However, something about Chris's demeanor raised doubts among the deer hunters who found him. He didn't appear traumatized, despite experiencing something unimaginably horrifying. The truth about that night began to emerge when Chris's behavior and mental state were scrutinized. He admitted that he had killed his grandparents, modifying some details as the case unfolded. He mentioned hearing command hallucinations that urged him to commit the murders, which he attributed to his medication, Zoloft. The question of whether antidepressant medication, Zoloft, influenced Chris's actions became a focal point of the trial. The defense argued that the high dose of Zoloft may have triggered his volatile behaviors and led to his murderous actions. 2 medical experts supported this theory. The prosecution, on the other hand, contended that Chris was entirely responsible for the crime. They argued that he had planned the murders carefully to avoid being sent back to Florida and portrayed him as a mature criminal who set the house on fire to hide evidence. They challenged the idea that the medication played a significant role in his actions. The case went to trial, and Chris was initially declared guilty of murder. However, this verdict was later canceled due to concerns about jury deliberations. After appeals and public petitions, the case finally concluded in 2010, with Chris found guilty of the lesser charge of voluntary manslaughter and sentenced to 25 years in prison. As Chris served her time, something remarkable happened during her incarceration. She embraced her true identity as a transgender woman and legally changed her name to Kristen Avery Pittman. She was released in 2023 after completing her sentence, but is now under 2 years of state supervision. The case of Kristen Avery Pittman is a complex and tragic story that challenges our understanding of criminal responsibility, the role of medication, and the justice system's handling of young offenders. It raises important questions about the limits of personal responsibility, mental health, and the influence of medication. Thank you for joining us in exploring the Kristen Avery Pittman case. We encourage respectful and thoughtful discussion in the comments. If you have a case you'd like us to cover or any feedback, please share it with us. Stay tuned for more deep dives into fascinating legal cases, criminal psychology, and other intriguing topics. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more content.